let's get going. Just to say that Embrace the Journey, of course, is the book that Becky's written about her journey of life. And that is a journey that has been full of miracles and faith and fight too, on behalf of people who often don't have a voice of their own. People like the orphans in Kenya, or the widows in Sri Lanka, or the child slaves in Pakistan, or young women who are at risk of being trafficked. She has met them all, and through her organization, One by One, has made such a positive impact for the better on their lives. So Becky, tell me, what was the catalyst for you starting that organization?
Well, as a young girl, I felt God speak to me whilst I was on a short-term missions trip. But actually, the real catalyst moment for me was meeting a little girl. So it's probably the most commonly known story of One by One. But basically, I was out in Sierra Leone and met a little girl called Felicity, who was 9 years old and living on the streets. And unbeknown to me at that time, Felicity living on the streets had been so badly abused by both men and women. And when I first met her, all I noticed was she simply had no shoes on. And so I took her to the marketplace and bought her a little pair of flip-flops that cost me 50 pence. So it wasn't some huge act of generosity. It was a nothing moment, or so I thought. And that evening, I'd invited her to come. We were hosting a huge gospel campaign. And so I said, come back tonight and we'll take you with us. And sure enough, Felicity came back that evening, but she said to me, should I wait in your hotel room? And I said, no, we're just about to leave. And again, she said, yes, but shouldn't I wait in your bedroom? Now, if she'd have asked that question to my husband or one of the guys on the team, I would have immediately understood what she was asking. But here was a 9-year-old little girl asking a woman who at the time I was in my 20s. And I remember thinking, surely she couldn't. But sure enough, she told me, explained a third time, she thought I'd spent 50 pence on her so that I could have her body. And in that moment, I remember looking Felicity in the eyes, but making a promise to God. I made a vow there and then in that moment that I'll give my life to this, because no child should go through that kind of abuse ever. And if that means someone's got to give their life to it, even if it's only ever for one child, then that's enough for me to give my life to. Hence us calling the organisation One by One. And so Felicity was what I've called my non-negotiable moment of, no longer is this just an exciting dream that I can pick up and then put down when life's hard, but actually this is my non-negotiable moment of, there's no going back anymore. This is my life from now on.
I've lost your sound completely again now. Let me just turn this up. So a lot of the places that you've been to in order to do your work are places that many of us, especially as women, would be very daunted to go. So have you ever found yourself in real danger?
Yes. So this for me is the difficult one because I've never spoke about this publicly before, Pam. When I was writing the book, I wrote the book with Ralph Turner, who I just want to honour. I don't even know if he's on the call yet, but Ralph co-wrote the book with me and worded it so beautifully. So I just really want to honour him. He did a phenomenal job at relaying my heart. But I've never publicly spoken about it. But a few years ago, well, right at the very beginning, before I'd even began One by One, I went out on a long short-term missions trip, if there's such a thing. I spent 3 months in Mozambique working with a phenomenal organisation who I have the deepest respect for. And it was a phenomenal time. It was actually an amazing 3 months that have filled, it was a life-changing moment for me. Just an incredible time of spending time with Jesus, learning from other people who are out there working as missionaries, and just amazing. But it was on that trip that also I went through one of my hardest ever experiences. And so I'd got this day off, and being a British girl, we don't get much sunshine, do we, Pam? And so being a British girl, day off, what do you want to do other than go to the beach? And so I decided I was going to go to the beach this particular day. Now, I knew the cultural norm out there, and the cultural norm dictated that a woman cannot show her knees. If she shows her knees, it's inferring that she's probably a prostitute. And I knew this about the culture. But it was a day off, and I know it's ridiculous now I look back, but in my head, I'm like, it's a day off, it's fine. And so I went to the beach, and when I arrived at the beach, we wore what we called capelanas, which are basically long materials that just wrap around you. And when I got to the beach, I rolled my capelana up just to get some sunshine. The beach was empty, it was early in the morning still, and I wanted to get some sunshine on my very white British legs. And I was completely distracted. I was looking at the ocean, and on the floor were the most beautiful starfish. I mean, I'd never seen colours like it. In England, our starfish are just orange, but out there was all different colours, and it was just beautiful. And so I remember bending down to look at one of these starfish, and all of a sudden a man came up behind me, and he came up behind me and you know, put his hand up my capelana, and I remember just diving back. I'd come from a Christian home where I was so sheltered and loved and cherished, and so I'd never gone through anything like this. Obviously, I was a young girl, unmarried, and I just remember jumping back, and I said no in both Portuguese and the tribal language, which was called Makua. And I remember just beginning to shake, and he began to expose himself and made it quite clear what he intended to do with me. And I remember in the corner of my eye seeing a restaurant on the beach, and I just thought to myself, if I can get there, I'll be okay, because the beach was still empty at this moment, and I'm just thinking, I just need to get help. And I remember thinking, okay, don't run, because if he sees you scared, maybe he'll attack you more. I was trying to pretend like I was big and brave, even though I was petrified. And so I did the you know, when you kind of run walk, I did the run walk thing, but made it to this little restaurant, and praise Jesus, there were 2 girls from the mission school that I was on in this restaurant. And so I literally, by this point, I was in a state, I was crying, I was trembling, I was just in a mess, because he'd followed me the entire way up. And I made it to the restaurant, and as soon as he saw me with 2 of the Western girls, he turned away and ran. And I remember just the relief of he's gone, I'm safe, I'm with other people now. But then all of a sudden, what was fear suddenly became anger, and just feeling overwhelmed at how angry I was. But 2 days later, now, I guess in that 2 days, maybe I should have contacted the police. I think in my mind, I blamed myself, because I knew the culture and about exposing your knees. But I thought because I'd broken a cultural norm, it's therefore my fault. And so I didn't call the police, I left it. But 2 days later, we were in the mission school, and in the mornings, it was just for the Western students. In the afternoon, Mozambican pastors came and joined us, so it was translated. But in the morning sessions, it was just us Western girls and Western students. And so it's only in English. And all of a sudden, this Mozambican person stumbled into our tent. He was quite clearly drunk, but he stumbled into the tent. And where should he sit but the chair right in front of me? And all of a sudden, this same thing, this same feeling came bubbling up, and it was both fear and anger. And if I'm honest with you, Pam, it took everything within me to restrain, because I just wanted to punch the guy. But mercifully for me, one of the girls that were in the restaurant the day that it happened, her name was Meredith, and she was in the tent that morning, and had seen the guy, recognized him, so came rushing over to me. This was all while a lesson's going on. But she rushed over to me, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I just said, "No." And she simply began to pray for me very gently and very softly. Within seconds, all the fear and all the anger just lifted. And I just had such a compassion, I guess is the only word, compassion for this man that was quite clearly drunk and in a state. He didn't know where he was or what he was doing. And so actually by the end of the lecture, I was able to go to him with my friend Meredith and actually begin, it was a very short conversation because my Portuguese and my Makua were very limited, but just explain Jesus loves you. And he stumbled out of the tent that day. But I remember just the feeling of, instead of anger, it was replaced with compassion. And I think of the Bible verse that says, what casts out fear is love. I think sometimes we think the opposite of fear is bravery, but actually in that moment, the opposite of fear, and according to the Bible, the opposite of fear is actually love. And being able to tell this man that God loves him almost lifted something off me. And I think I learned something quite powerful even back there about the power of forgiveness, because oftentimes when people wrong us and people hurt us, we almost hold on to the grudge, as it were, because, well, we've been badly treated, we've been badly done to, and so this is ours to hold on to. We're a victim in all this. But actually forgiveness is about you, not the other person, and it's letting you off the hook. And choosing to forgive him that day was a huge, powerful life lesson, I guess, for me. But then fast forward now, we'll go into this in a moment, I'm sure, but we run the Dignity Project, where we help thousands of girls, many of whom have actually gone through abuse themselves. And I've been counselling.
Actually, tell us about the Dignity Project now, because that was launched in Parliament, wasn't it, in 2019? Who's involved in that? Who is the need for, and what are you doing?
So it's about girls who, we found out girls were going missing in our own village, and found out human trafficking was taking place. And so after doing a lot of research, we actually found out that a lot of girls are missing a week of school every month due to period poverty. So because many girls around the world don't have access to sanitary products, for that week of school, they have to wait at home. Now, by the time she's finished primary school, she's missed a quarter of her education. And sadly, the traffickers are very much aware of this. So many girls are targeted once they finish primary school. The girls are targeted by the traffickers, who try to entice them to come with them to the city. They've got wonderful jobs of being a cook or a cleaner or a nanny, whatever line they think they may work on the girl. And so many times the girls go willingly, but then are sadly never seen or heard of again. And so we go into primary schools, giving girls reusable sanitary products so that they can stay in school every single week of the month. But we also bring a lot of training all around human trafficking. But on these Dignity Days that we've now taken all around the world, we've reached almost 20,000. I think we're at 18,000 and so many girls. But after doing these days for years now, I've had girl after girl come talk to me about how she's been abused in the past, and they often blame themselves. And I've spoke to so many girls, reassuring them that you didn't deserve this, you didn't cause this. Girls in India who were wearing the wrong colour sari, and so they attracted the attention, and just bizarre things where they think they're to blame. And so I've counselled girl after girl to tell her, this is not you, there's no shame on you. And then realised that actually for years I'd been carrying the exact same guilt over what happened to me in Mozambique. And so that's really why I decided
to turn that experience to very good use, really. Let's just have one more quick story before we stop for a bit. And obviously the book is full of miracles, little everyday miracles, but also very significant ones too. And I love the story about the blue container.
Yeah, so the blue box, that is one of my favorite stories. It goes right back to the very early days of One by One. But we were doing a feeding program, and again, it was actually in Sierra Leone, and we'd gone to a derelict bush shelter. I was with my friend, a lady called Amanda, and we went out to this derelict bush shelter, and one of the local ladies had prepared a box of rice for us. It was this little blue box of rice, and it was enough to feed 50. Now, when an African mama tells you this will feed 50 people, I mean, they are on it. And so we went with our little box. But actually, when I arrived, I began panicking because there was over 100 people gathered in this bush shelter. And we'd gone with the heart to preach the gospel, but then feed all these people. I remember saying to Amanda, but we don't have enough food to feed everyone. If we preach the gospel but then can't feed them, does it somehow reflect badly on the gospel? I remember really panicking about this. And we decided to go for it anyway. So we preached the gospel, many responded, which was amazing. But it came time to serving people from our blue box. And so we started dishing out the rice, and the little blue box of rice are going down and down and down. But anyway, amazingly, everybody ate. But it wasn't until the very end when someone came up to me and they said, there's a family in this house here and they've actually got TB. So they've been too unwell to come out and attend today. But with any leftovers, can we give it to them? So I said, yeah, of course you can. So they came out with this orange washing bowl. Now, it was the type of bowl they would wash their clothes in. So it was a big washing bowl. And it wasn't until this point of scraping our leftovers after feeding over 100 people, and what was now remaining, what we scraped into this orange washing bowl, was more than what we started with in the little blue box. And now I'd never seen anything like this. I'd preached about the feeding of the 5,000, but to see this in person just blew my mind. You couldn't comprehend it at the time. It was only when you look back that you just thought, oh my goodness, Jesus did an amazing miracle there. But what was beautiful about the blue box was years later, every time we now get a big bill, whether it's for a children's home or whether it's for building a new school or a medical centre, every time we receive the big bill, we never have enough ever. But every time when I start to panic about, oh, how are we going to pay this? I go back in my mind to a little blue box where we had nowhere near enough for the need, but we had him. And each time God's provided in the most beautiful and miraculous way.
Well, he certainly has. Well, let's take a bit of a break now to see a video which shows how One by One changes the situation and indeed the future for so many thousands of people across the world.
In 2006, while serving on a mission team in Sierra Leone, Becky came across a situation that would change the course of her life forever.
I met a little girl on this trip named Felicity, and after noticing she had no shoes, I knew this was a situation I could help in. I bought the shoes and was stunned by her response, as she thought I had only bought the shoes in exchange for her body.
This was the moment that would stick with Becky forever, and ultimately would cause us to create safe spaces that vulnerable children, just like Felicity, could call home.
In 2012, the first fruits of One by One came into being in the form of King's Children's Home in Bumalabi, Kenya. 200 children currently call King's their home, and although costing £150,000 to build, the entire project was paid for upfront in cash with no debt or mortgage.
Alongside the children's home, the One by One Schools outreach team in Bumalabi reaches out to approximately 10,000 children every week across 18 different schools.
In the 3 years since its birth, our Dignity Project has reached over 10,000 vulnerable girls in communities at risk of human trafficking across the world. With both practical and educational tools, the Dignity Project will soon be empowering girls in brand new partner locations, including India, Brazil, South Africa, Pakistan and Sierra Leone.
In the wake of a 25-year civil war, our Hope Sri Lanka project continues to feed over 150 widows and their children every single day. As part of our project in Sri Lanka, supported career opportunities are also currently being developed to help those who have lost so much get back on their feet once again.
In 2018, the foundations of King's Children's Home Pakistan was laid, designed with the goal of rescuing vulnerable children out of slavery. Our King's Children's Home in Pakistan will open its doors in spring 2019.
Though starting with an encounter with just one little girl, One by One has now sent over 300 unique volunteers on mission trips all across the world, reaching almost every continent. And through the generous giving of our partners and friends, we have sent over £1.2 million directly to the mission field.
So whether it's local mission or global mission, our heart is to see believers reaching out to the lost in our world, one by one.
Well, there's some wonderfully smiling faces there. And if you've got questions that you'd like to ask, just bear in mind that at the end of the programme, we'll be trying to answer as many of those as we can. So send them in. We'd love to hear from you. But Becky, I noticed, of course, that your husband Matt was in that picture, and often you and the family travel together. You are a mum, you are a wife, but also how difficult it must have been when Matt suddenly became very seriously ill as a result of that travel. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so we were actually in America at the time. We'd been to Kenya, which is where I contracted malaria, not that we knew it at the time. And then we'd gone to America and were speaking in many different churches. And it was while we were there, he started to become unwell. And we took him to the hospital, and they actually thought he had Ebola at the time. It was at the time where Ebola was all over the news at that moment. And in fact, just a few days before, someone in Texas had got Ebola. And so everyone was on high alert. And so Matthew was immediately put into quarantine. I remember the doctors coming into his room. They would wear all the space suits to come in and take yet more swabs from him. And after a few tests, they found out he had malaria, and it had gone quite serious. Now, my kids in Kenya get malaria all the time. And so initially when he was diagnosed, we almost breathed a sigh of relief, because compared to Ebola, malaria was amazing. But we didn't realize just how severe Matt got it. And so his heart, his lungs, his liver and his kidneys all went into organ failure. And we later found out the malaria had also gone cerebral, so to his brain. And I remember this one day, the doctor took me into a side room and she said, we've actually stopped all the treatment. He's got 2, maybe 3 hours left to live. So we're now just going to give him pain relief until he passes. And I remember in that moment, just feeling like every dream and every promise had shattered on the floor, as everything felt so wrong. That's not how it was supposed to work out in our lives. And I remember the doctor telling me, you know, you can't go back to Africa. You've got a little boy at home who calls you mummy. You cannot go back to Africa. And with tears pouring down my face, I said, yes, but I've got over, at the time I had 100 kids in Kenya. I said, I've got over 100 babies in Kenya who also call me mummy. How can I not go back? And again, the moment with Felicity, the non-negotiable moment of just because life's really hard doesn't mean we get to quit what we do. And it was again that moment of reality of, are you really all in, or are you going to pull out when life's a bit hard? But mercifully, we put a plea out on Facebook and asked people, please would you pray? And people from all around the world began to pray for Matt. And actually he made a dramatic recovery to the point, I mean, even today he's been out running. I never understand people who run for fun. I run because I like lots of food. People who run for fun, I don't understand that one bit. But he's fit and he's healthy and he's well after God did an amazing miracle in his life.
It's not just miracles, is it? Because you've actually thought that once in a while angels have come your way. Can you tell us one example, the one you remember most?
Yes, so there are a couple of situations actually where I wasn't sure, but this particular one, I was again with my friend Amanda, and we were traveling through to another city, and we were in a convoy of 3 cars, and Amanda and I were in the final last car, and we'd left the city about an hour ago. We'd had lunch, and then we'd been driving for about an hour when all of a sudden our car began to like chug and then suddenly stop. And I didn't have a mobile phone with me. It was before the days where everybody had mobile phones. And so the other cars went ahead, not even realizing our car had stopped. And so initially it was mid-afternoon to dusk. So initially we were really super chilled about it. And Amanda and I were walking around with all these trees and forests surrounding us. So we're just wandering around while the driver is in the bonnet trying to see what on earth's going on with the car. I better say hood, just in case there are any Americans on this call who are now imagining the driver under somebody's hat. But he was looking to see what had gone wrong. Now, he discovered that it was a certain wire that had burnt up while we were driving that connected the engine to something else. And without this certain wire, the car wouldn't work. The problem was we were an hour's drive from the city. So for him to find a garage would be a long walk. And by now, dusk is turning quite dark. Well, as I say, we were fine while he was chilled out. But once the driver, the local, started panicking, we started panicking. And so I remember the driver saying to Amanda and I think you need to get in the back of the car and duck down. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, where in the world are we? So we got in the back of the car and we ducked down, and we're praying, we're singing old songs, old hymns from years ago. I mean, we're doing everything we know to do to just say, Jesus, help. We're in the middle of nowhere, stranded in what appearingly is a dangerous area. And as we were praying, all of a sudden, a man on a bicycle came up from behind us. And on the front of his bicycle, he had this little basket. So it wasn't big. It was just this tiny little basket on the front of the bicycle. And he pulled up and he spoke to our driver and he said, what's the problem? So the driver explained, we need this certain wire, but I can't get to a garage. I don't know really what we're going to do. Well, the man on the bicycle just smiled. And in the basket, he pulled out the exact wire we needed. And he also knew how to fit it. So he pulled out the wire, fitted it in the car, and then just got back on his bicycle and pedaled off into the dark. Well, our driver got back in the car and turned on the engine, and sure enough, it fired straight up and off we went. And it wasn't until we started driving off that I was like, oh my goodness, either God sent a Christian in obedience carrying the exact wire, or that was some sort of angelic help. I don't know which, but oh my goodness, was I thankful for the protection of God
for it anyway. Yes, you have such a heart for children, and of course it's very hard for us to understand the situations, the circumstances, the conditions that they have to live in. Are there one or two who've touched your heart? Can you tell us about the one perhaps that you remember most?
Yeah, well, they all touch my heart, because the social workers report for all of our kids are just brutal, especially for our King's kids. So they're the children who actually live with us. We also look after hundreds of other kids that just attend our school, and we help educate and feed them. But in terms of our King's kids, they've gone through hellish situations. They've gone through circumstances that children shouldn't even know the concept of, let alone have lived through it. And so I've got certain children who have literally got machete scars on their heads from where they're attacked. But I think the one that's probably most prominent for me would be Shadrach's story. And so Shaddy's one of my initial King's kids. He was one of my original 42 kids back in 2012. And when he first moved in, we actually didn't know very much. All the social workers' report said was that both his mum and dad had died. His dad had died first and his mother died a little later. But it was only after Shadrach had lived with us maybe 2 years that he actually started to open up about what happened to his mum. And so he explained that his dad had been polygamous and his father actually had 3 wives. And so when the father passed away, the other 2 wives decided to conspire together that if they killed off Shaddy's mum, they'd have a bigger plot of land to share just between the 2 of them. So indeed they did. They actually stoned her to death, and Shadrach watched this. Now, to make it even worse, the 2 people supposedly raising him were these 2 women who just killed off his mom. But Shaddy had an older brother called Vincent, who was Shaddy's hero. I mean, Shadrach had lost both mum and dad, so his big brother was his everything. And Vincent would rear a few chickens to help get some extra eggs to help feed both Shadrach, and he also had a little brother called Bernard. And so they would eat these eggs, and that's how they get by from day to day. But as time was passing, they kept noticing these chickens were going missing, and they couldn't figure out what was happening. And so one night, the older brother Vincent laid a trap, and he laid awake watching to see what was happening. And one of their uncles were actually coming and taking these chickens in the night. And so Vincent actually faced him face on and said, what are you doing? Like, why are you stealing the little we have? But I think in that culture, the uncle was so furious that his little nephew had challenged him in this way, that he was furious. And laying there on the farm floor, they all have their own little personal farms, they call them shambas. But laying there in the little farm was again another machete. It's what they used to chop down the large maize. And he picked up the knife and went to attack him and actually cut his neck. Now, praise Jesus, he missed the major artery. And so the big brother survived it, and the uncle got put in prison. The problem was, within a couple of years, the uncle was discharged. And the day he was discharged, he came back to their mud hut and killed Vincent there and then in the mud hut. So by this point, Shadrach had seen both his mother and his older brother murdered. So by the time he moved into our children's home, he was just a broken little boy. He was very timid, very withdrawn, would often wet the bed, even though he was older, at an age where you wouldn't ordinarily. But as the years have gone by, we've watched Shadrach not just grow in height and in weight, but we've watched him grow in confidence, because he's suddenly realized who he is in Christ, that he's got a heavenly Father who adores him. And after being in a place where he can sleep at night and not panic of who's going to hurt him or his little brother Bernard, he can rest every night. And we've watched God bring so much hope back into his life. And watching that firsthand has probably been my biggest joy on this journey so far.
Now, we live in a very comfortable community, don't we? Our children are well brought up. They have everything they need. It's very hard then to think about how difficult life is for children. For example, in Pakistan, I mean, we were saying that they are slaves in this day and age. How can that be?
Exactly. We went out to Pakistan actually initially just with the Dignity Project. And so because the Dignity Project is so practical, even nations like Pakistan will open its doors to us. And so I went on this trip thinking it was a one-off to take the Dignity Project. And it was amazing. We reached 1,100 girls. It was phenomenal. We were able to preach the gospel, which to preach the gospel in a nation like Pakistan is just such an honor. But on our last day there, they took us into the brick factories. And up until this point, I'd never even heard of these brick factories. They were completely unknown to me. I was very ignorant about it. But sure enough, here there were literally hundreds of families trapped in slavery. Now, they didn't have the bonds on that you imagine slaves, but they're very much trapped. The brickmasters literally own these people. So they have no identity card, no identity papers. The brickmasters own all this because these people are now owned. And so I remember meeting one family and saying, well, what happened? Why are you in this situation? And he explained that 13 years ago, his wife was pregnant. And as she went into labor, there were complications and she needed an emergency C-section. But being a simple man, he just didn't have the money for that. And so he did the only thing he knew to do. And he took a loan of $150 from a brickmaster. And he paid for the surgery. All went well. Mum and baby were healthy. So brilliant. Except 13 years later, I'm stood looking at this man and wife and their now teenage son. And 13 years later, they're still paying off this debt. And I remember saying, well, goodness, 13 years to pay off $150. Surely you've paid it off now. And they said, oh no, now we own $2,500 because the interest rate is so extortionate. We can't possibly ever pay it off. It's an impossible debt. And the problem in the brick factories is the debt is incurred, it's inherited. So we met people who were paying off their grandparents' debts and they're now still owned by these brickmasters. And
so were you able to do anything to stop that, to change the situation?
Exactly. So my initial reaction was, well, $2,500 to a Westerner, that's nothing. We can save up and have that and see a family freed. And so that was my initial reaction of, well, can we just pay off their debt and work family by family to pay off their debt and see them out? And they explained to us that actually the person at the blood rate can pay that. But if someone outside wants to redeem a family, the brickmaster can charge double, triple, quadruple to outprice, because the family is actually worth far more in the amount of bricks they make to the master than the value of the debt itself. Added to that, because all these people have ever done is make bricks, if they were to leave the brick factory, they've had no education, they can't get another type of job. And so they leave the factory and they've got no home, they've got no way of feeding themselves or their families. And so when they leave, slavery almost looks better in the sense of at least they've got a home and an income to feed their family. And so we began to pray about, well, what can we do to change this? Something's got to stop. This is an injustice and someone's got to do something. And so the more we prayed about it, the more we felt we needed to build a safe house. And so we built our second ever King's Children's Home, but this time it's a safe house in Pakistan. where we've rescued over 50 kids out of slavery. So those children now get a full-time education so that in 10, 15 years time, they can get real employment and pay off the family debt at that blood rate. But then they also have a continuing income so that they can sustain their families out of slavery and provide home and food and things like that. So it's very much a long-term project, but we believe it's the right thing to do there.
Well, your journey has been an amazing one, and obviously you've got a long way to go. But I wonder if at this point you might like to just share with us what your prayer is for what lies ahead for One by One and for you and the family.
So I think our major thing going forward is growing the work in Pakistan. So Kenya is almost like a village. It's not just a children's home. I mean, we've got the homes, we've got the school, we've got a medical center, we've got homes for teenagers. I mean, it's almost a village within the village now. So that's thriving and doing amazing and being a real light in that area. So I'm thrilled with what's going on there. But I think the shift very much going forward is going to be expanding in Pakistan, because on my last trip there, we were there for the opening of the safe house. And it was so exciting and wonderful for the kids that have been rescued. But going back into the brick factories on that exact trip just broke my heart, because I was surrounded by the hundreds and thousands of kids that haven't been released, that the brickmasters won't allow to go into a safe house. And so I remember feeling this almost hopelessness in this situation. And so again, it was a case of, well, what can we do today to make a difference? And so we've launched Sunday School in the brick factories. We're now working in 50 brick factories, doing Sunday School every week. And so we're reaching 1,000 kids who are currently in slavery. But because we're on the ground, feet on the ground in these places, we're now hearing more and more stories of just horrific abuse, of 3-year-olds being raped and murdered and then just left on the brick factory floor. And again, it's one of those non-negotiable moments of, we have got to give our life to this. If it costs us everything, we're all in. And so we've decided we're going to firstly extend our safe house, which is a huge project to do in the middle of a global pandemic. Ordinarily, organizations at this time are thinking, okay, let's just survive it and ride it out. To expand in a global pandemic is ridiculous, but we don't get to pick the timing of this. And while over 3-year-olds have been raped and murdered, I can't sit back and say, well, it's just not the right time to expand. It's a case of, okay, we've got to do something and we're either in or we're not. And so we're
I think, Becky, you've just got to remember the blue tin and know that actually God will make it come right for you, won't he? Absolutely. So honestly, it's been wonderful, a tremendous insight. And I'm sure there are lots and lots of questions, but I think we just wish you Godspeed and God's blessing in all that you do. And I think that everybody should read your book.
Thank you, Pam. Really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, ladies. That's fabulous. I think we've got a couple of questions for you, Becky, if that's okay. Absolutely. And so our first question tonight is from Sophie, and she says, will the ministry expand to any other African nations? I know you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but just if there's any particular African nations that you want to expand to.
Yes, so I think because of the Dignity Project, we get to go in and see needs. And that's often a big thing. I always use the phrase that once you see a need, you can never unsee it. And so even like with Pakistan, that was supposedly just going to be a one-off trip for the Dignity Project. And now years on, we've got this safe house and Sunday school, and we're hoping to go on and build schools in the brick factories themselves. So it's just going to go bigger and bigger. But that was as a result of the Dignity Project. So I think as new nations open up for the Dignity Project, it's a great way of going in and being feet on the ground and seeing the need. And then it's in those moments we allow the Holy Spirit to speak to our hearts of, okay, is this something we need to step in and help on? Is this something we can do? Can we make a difference here? And so even in this next year, we're going into Uganda, God willing, and if COVID allows, we're going to go into Uganda and also into Zambia, 2 completely new nations for One by One. And we're doing that with the Dignity Project. So I say all that to say, watch this space in terms of new African nations and new nations around the world, not even just Africa. You know, we've taken the Dignity Project into South America and Asia. And so it's just an open door to see where God leads next.
That's great. Fantastic. I've had one, I've lost it. Let's see if I can find it somewhere. So I know we've talked about this before, but we had a question from Lorna that says, do you know what happened to Felicity? I know we've chatted about this, but yeah, do you know what might have happened to Felicity?
I don't. I never saw her after that year. So that evening at the gospel campaign, she got saved, which was amazing. She gave her heart and life to Jesus. But then the other beautiful thing was there was a man who was, I believe, deaf, and who begged on the same street as both Felicity and a little boy that was with her, a boy named Solomon. And he received a healing that night. And I remember Felicity and Solomon's reaction as this man got healed, that they'd seen beg on the same street as them for years. Their reaction was, oh my goodness, this Jesus is real. Who knew? And so that was amazing. But sadly, I never got to see Felicity again. I did see Solomon a few years later and ask him if he still saw Felicity, but he doesn't. And so I think she's actually been a huge motivator for me, because obviously back then there was no children's home, there was no safe house, there was no Dignity Project. And so every time I reach another girl, in my head and in my heart, it's like I'm reaching Felicity again and again. Because the reality is, I don't know if she's alive today after going through what she did go through, living on the streets.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Mark's question is, why is the book called Embrace the Journey?
Okay, so it's called Embrace the Journey because I think it's so easy that we love life when everything's great. So when it's the Instagram moments of life and everything's going exactly as we want it to go, or exactly as we pray it to go, then life's great and we embrace those moments. But oftentimes I talk about there being bumps in the road. And actually this weekend I'm sharing with Pam. Pam does something every Sunday night called Sunday Night Live. And I actually share a little segment within it about this. But there's bumps in our road where it's not so great. You know, being assaulted in Mozambique was a not so great moment for me. And it was a moment that challenged me to my car. And it's not like it ends there. Life is great at throwing curveballs, right? And so there's challenges that come our way that can be incredibly painful. But I believe it's about embracing the journey that God has for us, because it's both the amazing high moments, but also it's also the what can be painful and low moments that truly shape who we are. Yeah. And it's probably the painful moments that make our characters more Christ-like than the incredible high mountaintop moments. And so I believe it's embracing all of our life that truly makes us more like Jesus.
Absolutely. Lots of things grow in the valley. Nothing grows on the mountaintops. Hey, that's fantastic. So we've had a question. Well, we've had a comment actually from Ralph Turner. Thought you'd like that. And he says how much of a privilege it was to help write the book with you. And I just I wanted to just ask you a link question off the back of that lovely comment from Ralph, just to say, how long did it take you to write this book whilst you were juggling all your commitments?
Well, for me, not too bad, because I had the joy of just offloading onto Ralph. So Ralph came and spent many days with me, and would just bring his dictaphone, and I would tell him story after story after story. For me, it was important to document it. I wanted it to be documented of all the miracles God's done, because I think as life goes on, you can forget the little moments, but actually it's the little moments that give you the faith for the big challenges sometimes. And so I wanted it documented. But Ralph was the one who worded it so beautifully and actually put it together. He's a far better writer than me. Anyone who's seen my grammar will know Ralph is a far better writer than me. So he did the hard work. I just had the joy of sharing my heart and sharing all that God had done along the way.
Oh, great. That's fantastic. So off the back of that, He just wanted to say that it's been amazing watching you, and he commented to say it's been so good for him to write that book for you, and he wants to thank you for that.
Ralph, I just want to say a huge thank you. You honestly did a phenomenal job. So it was a pleasure working with you. Thank you so much.
Oh. Do you have, I know you shared a little bit, but I've got another little question here, just about the future, really. Do you have anything that could, blow our minds today that perhaps you've got up your sleeve for the future of One by One?
So the big new things is, well, we've obviously extended our Sunday school work this year in Pakistan, which is huge. I mean, A, it's an Islamic nation, but B, to work in brick factories, it makes no sense. I remember initially the thought of approaching a brickmaster to ask if we could bring a Christian program that will take an hour a week. Who would say yes to that? For one, it's a distraction from the workload, but two, many of the brickmasters are Islamic leaders even, and everything about it just doesn't make sense. But you know what? Sometimes if you just ask, you'll be amazed at the response. And so we've had the green light to go into 50 brick factories, which is phenomenal. And so for that hour a week, those children aren't slaves, they get to be children, and they're taught all about the love and the hope of Jesus Christ. But as I said, because of our work there, we're seeing the needs far more frequently. And so literally week after week, we get a phone call with yet another little girl that's either been raped or been killed or just horrific things. And so as a result of that, we are extending our safe house, as I shared with Pam before. But then our plans going forward is to actually go into the brick factories and build schools. Wow. Now, again, this seems almost ridiculous. Like, which brickmaster is possibly going to allow that? Because that's a full distraction from the workload. And they know our motive is going to be so that these kids can get an employment, real employment in the future to pay off the debt and release their whole families. But we're just believing the favor of God. We've so many times been amazed at God's favor. So why not go for it and build schools in brick factories? And I don't know how it's going to look. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know how we're going to possibly finance that. But again, the little blue box keeps coming up. And each time God makes a way where it feels impossible, all we have to do is just say yes. That's all God's looking for. He's not looking for your wealth. He's not looking for your education. He's not looking for you to have the most influential surroundings or society. He just wants a heart that's available to say yes. And while ever we keep saying yes, God keeps making incredible ways ahead of us.
That's great. Thank you so much, Becky. There were so many more questions that I'd love to ask you, really amazing questions. So maybe we can have a little look at them in the chat. But that brings us to the end of our question asking, but it also brings us to the announcement of who has won the free book of Embrace the Journey tonight. So our winner, drum roll please, is, and I hope I get this right, is Jackie Ingram. So well done, Jackie. You have won a free copy of Embrace the Journey. If you could email us, Jackie, at admin@onebyone.net. That's admin@onebyone.net. Just your name and your address, and we'll get that posted out to you really, really soon. So well done on that. Thank you to all the participants who have been on the call tonight. Thank you so much. I think we've had something like 63 of them, or something at the top end of that. So thank you so much. I hope that you've been blessed. A big thank you to Pam for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for all your insight. And it is a privilege to work alongside you. And also a big thank you to Becky for sharing your heart with us, and all the things that you've seen and heard and done over the years. I hope that it's encouraged you to embrace this season, and that will launch you into the next season. I want to encourage you to get this book and be absolutely blessed by it. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, Becky and Pam. God bless and goodbye, and have an amazing rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.